Can computers be creative? Welcome to Philosopher's Corner. I'm John. Can computers be creative? Well, we know that computers are a series of programming code at their core. They're logical routines written by human beings, and at this point, maybe even routines compiled by other computers, but eventually at some point, the code that's running either the source computer or coming directly from the human was written by a human being at some point. So any process that's happening in a computer was sourced by a human mind and then written into a logical routine. And if you're doing computer programming at a point where you're doing cut and paste routines, as you know, if you open those up, those are visual representations of logical routines that are written inside the visual code. So it all comes back down to visual code, which are just logical string routines. If you've never seen computer coding, they're just like little sentences. They have their own language, their own grammar, and basically write a bunch of routines to tell the computer how to process things, how to route the electricity through the circuit board, to toggle logic switches, and essentially when you tell them how to identify and articulate certain electricity through the system, it leads to different conclusions and actions, and each one of those is put into its own routine, and then you can basically start stacking them like Legos and build things. So the question is, can computers be creative? And the answer is, well, we got to figure out exactly what the standard for what we're saying creative is. Because it can be creative in the sense that it can repackage things. Like ChatGPT, right? Or OpenAI or any of those. They're doing mechanical repackaging. So they have probably basic, like neural network type basic programming in there where they have routines that tell them, okay, if you requested this, then that gives you access to these ingredients. And these are the rules of logic or grammar or whatever, depending on what kind of output you want that you kind of need to follow. And so, and it should have like this structure, right? So it may have like a few different layers of programming, like this is the request, these are the, based upon this request, these are the amount of ingredients you need. Based on the ingredients you need, they have to go through this logic filter. Through this logic filter, they have to be structured a certain way to like meet the demands of a human story, da-da-da-da-da. And each layer, right, until, so you put in your request here, and it goes through all these different layers. And then at the end, you get, like, say in ChatGPT, you said, give me a story about whatever. And you, like a person, an object, and an action, right? And then they go, okay, so you put it in here, and then goes through all these layers. And then out the other side, it says, oh, here's a story of Joe and his orange as he tries to go to the grocery store. Joe goes to the grocery, da-da-da-da-da-da, right? And then writes it out, and then says, and at the end, Joe is happy with his orange at the grocery store. So it's all within a closed system. It's all repackaging and mixing of ingredients and applying certain laws to come out the other side. And many of you, especially if you're a pure creative, you'll know that every time you get a result from AI, it has this forced sense of an enclosed system. It rearranges things, it gives you some new perspectives, and almost invariably it's unhuman feeling because it has it's really only applying laws of logic. And since the logical loop that it's working in is a closed structure, it can only get closer within that structure. It can never expand past the logical structure. That's one of the limits of logic, because logic is a limit. It's a guideline, but it's also a hard limit. And so you can always feel this sense of constriction in an AI provided answer. It's always there because it logically has to be there, because it cannot transcend its logical limitations or the limits of its logic programming, which is all it is. It's all it consists of. So any attempt, it makes it creativity, it's a sort of deceptive, to be honest, because it's not really being creative. It's remixing, and it's finding internal synergy for a lot of things, which some people think that's creative. I get what you mean. I mean, in a sense, like, remixing is creativity. Don't get me wrong. But what we're seeing here is that when we think about human creativity, which is the standard definition, that's the real version of creativity, we're talking about the main aspect of creativity as we've come to understand it and feel it is the ability to transcend our logical limitations. Like, that's true, pure creativity, is to tap into something that's transcendental, that we have this logical structure, right? Like a computer has all these logical limitations in a closed circle of routines, and then somehow poking out of that, outside of that structure, is like a rod of inspiration. And that rod of inspiration can bring in new ingredients and things that transcend logic and things that are not currently appearing as available as an option within the closed circuit. And the creativity acts as the process for bringing in something into that closed logical circuit that is not present in the closed logical circuit, which computers cannot do. So I guess the next question would be, can a programmer program the computer so that it has the ability to channel inspiration so that it can transcend its logical loop, its closed circle, right? Because it only exists in its series of routines. And it can present it different ways, and it can reshuffle it. Not that it has an animus yet, which is another thing. That's even before we get to the idea that, do computers have souls, or can they have souls, right? So right now it just has these logical limitations, and it's just mechanically giving you different results that you can either interpret as being creative or not. It'd be no different. You could, using the same logic, you could just make a mechanical watch that has different sentences on it, and when you twist the watch a certain way with certain choices on the watch face, you get a story, right? The computer is no different than that. It's just, since it's digital, instead of having 500 working parts in the watch or whatever, or 1,000 working parts in the watch that you can wind up, you can have 100 million working parts in the watch. And so what shows up on the face of it looks like sometimes it looks like, oh, well, that's not mechanical, it's fairly flowing and it's nearly human sounding. It's almost never a human feeling, but it's simply a mechanical process, a digital mechanical process. So the question is, can or has somebody been able to write a piece of programming that connects the computer process, its logical routine process, to be able to channel inspiration so that something that doesn't currently exist in its ecosystem can be brought into it? And it doesn't count, that doesn't mean can it go to other parts of the internet and source more information. It means, can it go outside of its logical system? Can it pull it out of the reality? Can it pull it out of beyond the reality to truly be creative? Because creative means that it's new, it's creating growth. Growth is occurring, originality is occurring. In view of that, at the present moment, computers cannot truly be creative. They cannot be original. They can repackage to ad infinitum. So it's like a new, it can present as a new thing. It's just something you haven't seen before, but it's a remix of the current ingredients, which it's some level of, it's more like mixing presented as creativity, and this is the philosophical sense. In a practical sense, for a lot of people, that is creative. Like, oh, that's creative, you mixed it up. You got something I hadn't seen before. That's creative. Okay. But philosophically speaking, where creativity is the channeling of inspiration to create something new, original, which catalyzes growth in the reality, it doesn't meet that standard. Also, creativity is, for a computer to be creative, it's also going to, like, it's just basically at the base consciousness level right now. Like, a computer can't create another life right now. Like, a computer can't procreate, right? You can maybe program it so that it self-replicates its programming into other computer boards or whatever, but that's different than it having autonomy and having a body and procreating with another electronic life form, and then, them having offspring. Totally different thing. And I think it's important as we continue to move forward to understand the discernment between those things and don't accept one for the other. Because if you prematurely say, oh, well, computers can be creative and that's on par with what human creativity is, then you're going to go down a dark path. And a dark path because now you've accepted a substitute creativity that's not creativity. It's remixing, but creativity involves inspiration and transcendental concepts, things that are ineffable, things that are beyond logical programming, and it's not against computers. That's why human beings, if you're strictly only logical scientists trying to be creative, can't be creative, because the logical loop does not allow for creativity. That's why when you get to quantum mechanics and you start seeing things like the God particle or the consciousness molecules, where physics starts to meet spirituality in that area of quantum, which is also metaphysics, it starts to screw up traditional scientists, because scientists, a lot of them, they only rely on the rational brain and their logical loops. And so anything that's beyond that, at first their reaction is, of course, denial, because then it hints at a spiritual realm or a realm that it goes beyond logic, or it has its own logic, or something that just doesn't go with the logical routines running, well, on this side, running in their head. And in that way, if a person's only running the logical side of their head, they're no different than a computer. And creativity, you got to get both hemispheres of the brain synced up. Creativity demolishes that. It incorporates logic as a tool, but not as a god. And so a computer is essentially just like one side of a human brain. It's not really comparable, because the human brain can do way more computations and is infinitely programmed. It's like it's a joke. The human brain's so astoundingly amazing. It's crazy. But just the logical side of the human brain dwarfs what computers can do, and computers can only do the logical side. There still is not an emotional feeling computer yet that's been designed. So even if a computer gets super amazing, it's only dealing with logic. It hasn't even begun to deal with any sort of emotion, hasn't done general energetic spectrum, taking into account for like the emotional atmosphere of anything. It doesn't have any feel. It certainly hasn't gone transcendental yet. And those are all vital components in true creativity. True creativity cannot be limited to the strictly logical. And computers, by their current constitution, are strictly limited to logical routines for their processing, so they can't truly be creative. And I think it's important to note that, because we don't want to give them too much power, which we probably already have, before we can determine and discern what its actual present day capabilities are. So trying to give them, or I say them, trying to ascribe qualities to a machine that they don't have, because they appear to have, because they can help as an intellectual tool, is a dangerous thing to do. It's like going into your kitchen and start worshiping your blender because it makes food, and then start to say, oh, it's the cook. You go in and say, oh, the blender in my kitchen is the chef of the kitchen. This is not true. It has capabilities, but they're all dependent on human logic, reasoning, and interaction. The same thing with computers. They're machines that can amplify our intellect and calculating power and a whole bunch of other things, and they're great machines. But right now, they're still machines, and they're just being programmed by other human programmers to mimic human consciousness and decision making and creativity, but they're not even in the same ballpark yet. And they're good. They're great tools. They're amazing tools. And whether or not they gain consciousness or whatever, that's a video. That's another video. But as it stands, computers be creative? In the true sense, no, they can't be. Can they remix and master and do like low levels of things that people can be like, well, that's like creative, like small creative? Like, yeah, they can. But actual creativity that we come to know and love from artists and great thinkers and inspirational figures in human history, no, and they're not even close. So, well, I hope you found this time at Philosopher's Corner helpful. As always, great having you, and I hope you have fun.